The text message arrived at 2:47 in the morning, pulling Maya Rodriguez from a restless sleep. Her younger sister's name glowed on the screen, and even before reading the words, Maya felt that familiar knot of worry tighten in her stomach. Lisa was in the emergency room. Nothing life-threatening, just a badly sprained ankle from slipping on her apartment stairs, but she couldn't walk, couldn't work, and she was terrified of losing the cleaning job that barely kept her afloat. The message was desperate, pleading. Could Maya cover her morning shift at the Blackwood estate? Just this once. Just for today. Maya stared at the ceiling of her cramped studio apartment, watching shadows dance across the water-stained plaster. At 32, she'd already lived several lifetimes worth of disappointment. A failed marriage. A teaching career that never launched because life kept getting in the way. Student loans that felt like chains around her ankles. She worked 3 part-time jobs, none of them related to the English degree, gathering dust in her closet, and she was so tired that some mornings she couldn't remember what hope felt like. But Lisa was her baby sister, the only family she had left after their mother passed 2 years ago. So Maya dragged herself out of bed, pulled her dark hair into a ponytail, and drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the address Lisa had sent. The Blackwood estate sat behind iron gates in the kind of neighborhood where even the air seemed expensive. Maya's 15-year-old sedan coughed and sputtered up the winding driveway, looking painfully out of place among the manicured hedges and marble fountains. The house itself was a monument to wealth, all glass and stone and sharp modern angles that caught the rising sun. As Maya stood at the service entrance in Lisa's too small uniform, clutching the key and instructions her sister had pressed into her hand at the hospital, she felt like an imposter about to be discovered. She didn't belong in this world of luxury and privilege. She was just a woman trying to survive, covering a shift, hoping to make it through one day without falling apart. She let herself in, following Lisa's detailed notes about which rooms to clean first, which products to use, which areas were off limits. The house was silent in that heavy way expensive places are, as if even sound had been curated and controlled. Maya moved through the kitchen, the formal dining room, the living spaces that looked like museum exhibits rather than places where people actually lived. She was polishing the marble countertop in the kitchen when she heard it, a sound that stopped her cold. A child crying. Not the angry tantrum of a frustrated kid, but the broken, hopeless sobbing of someone who'd forgotten what comfort felt like. Maya followed the sound upstairs, knowing she was probably breaking protocol, not caring. She found him in a bedroom at the end of the hall, a little boy who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, sitting on the floor surrounded by scattered toys he wasn't playing with. His face was red and tear-streaked, his small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for someone so small. He looked up when Maya appeared in the doorway, startled, afraid, like he'd been caught doing something wrong by feeling his feelings. Every maternal instinct Maya possessed, instinct she'd buried after her divorce when children became another dream deferred, surged to the surface. She knelt down slowly, making herself small and non-threatening. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't offer empty reassurances. She just sat there on the carpet beside him and started talking in a soft voice about a story she used to tell her sister when Lisa had nightmares as a child. A story about a brave little dragon, who was afraid of his own fire until he learned that the scariest things about ourselves are sometimes our greatest gifts. The boy's sobs gradually quieted. He listened, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he started talking. His name was Daniel. His mom had died 8 months ago. His dad was always working, always sad, always far away even when he was in the same room. Daniel missed having someone read to him. He missed feeling like he mattered. He was so lonely in this big house that sometimes he felt invisible. Maya's heart shattered. She recognized that loneliness. She'd been living in it herself for years. Before she could second-guess herself, before professionalism or boundaries or common sense could intervene, she asked if he wanted her to read him a story. Daniel's eyes lit up with such desperate hope that Maya knew there was no going back. She spent the next hour reading from the books stacked beside his bed, doing silly voices, making him laugh, watching the sadness lift from his small shoulders like morning fog. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. Didn't know anyone was watching until a deep voice said, "Who are you?" Maya jumped to her feet, her heart hammering. The man standing in the doorway was tall and exhausted, wearing an expensive suit with the tie loosened and the top buttons undone. His dark hair was disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes held the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from grief that never gets a day off. This was James Blackwood, she realized. The CEO. The owner of this massive house. The father. And she was definitely about to be fired for overstepping every professional boundary that existed. But before she could stammer out an apology, Daniel launched himself across the room and wrapped his arms around his father's legs. "Daddy, this is Maya. She knows the best stories and she does funny voices and she's not scared of me crying." The joy in the child's voice was undeniable, heartbreaking in its intensity, like he was describing a miracle. James Blackwood looked at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. Confusion, certainly, but also something that looked almost like relief. He asked where the regular maid was, and Maya explained about her sister, about the emergency, about just covering for the day. She apologized for overstepping, for not sticking to cleaning, for letting her instincts override her professionalism. She gathered her supplies, ready to leave with whatever dignity she could salvage. But James stopped her. His voice was rough when he asked if she could come back tomorrow. And the day after that. Not as a maid. He didn't need another maid. He needed someone who could see his son. Someone who didn't treat Daniel like a fragile thing that might break or a problem to be managed. He needed someone who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sit with someone in their pain until they remember they're not alone. Maya wanted to say no. This wasn't her life. She wasn't a nanny. She had her own struggles, her own barely held together existence. But when she looked at Daniel's hopeful face, she saw herself. She saw Lisa. She saw every person who'd ever needed someone to notice they were drowning and throw them a lifeline instead of swimming past. So she said yes. The next 3 months transformed all of them in ways none could have predicted. Maya arrived every morning, and while the household staff cleaned, she spent her days with Daniel. They read books and drew pictures and built elaborate cities out of blocks. They talked about feelings without judgment. They went to the park and baked cookies that turned out lopsided and perfect. Slowly, carefully, Daniel started laughing more than he cried. The light came back into his eyes. He started sleeping through the night. But Maya also spent time with James, usually in the evenings after Daniel went to bed. At first, their conversations were just updates about his son's day. But gradually, they became more. James talked about his wife, about the cancer that took her so quickly he never got to say a real goodbye, about the guilt that consumed him because he'd been building his company while she was dying and he missed signs he should have seen. He talked about not knowing how to be both parents to a child who needed so much more than he knew how to give. Maya listened without platitudes. She shared her own losses, her own failures, her own experience of feeling like life had taken a hammer to all her plans and left her sorting through rubble. She told him about her teaching dreams, about the marriage that ended when her ex-husband decided he wanted someone more successful and less complicated. She told him about working multiple jobs and still barely surviving, about the shame of not living up to her own potential, about feeling invisible in a world that only seemed to value certain kinds of success. They found an unexpected kinship in their shared brokenness. James wasn't the untouchable CEO in his glass tower. Maya wasn't the struggling woman who'd settled for less than she deserved. They were just two people who'd been knocked down by life and were trying to figure out how to stand back up. But it was Daniel who truly brought them together. Watching Maya with his son, seeing the way she intuitively knew when to push and when to just be present, James started to remember what it felt like to hope. He started leaving work earlier. He started having dinner with them. He started reading the bedtime stories himself, with Maya there to prompt him when he got stuck or self-conscious. He started being present instead of just physically there. And Maya started to bloom. For years, she defined herself by her failures, by everything she wasn't. But Daniel's unconditional affection and trust reminded her that she had gifts that mattered. Her empathy, her creativity, her ability to make people feel seen and valued. James started asking her opinion on things beyond childcare. He valued her intelligence, her perspective, her insights. He encouraged her to take an online teaching certification course, offering to pay for it, telling her it was an investment in someone who'd already invested so much in his family. The evening everything changed started ordinarily enough. Daniel was asleep upstairs. Maya and James were in the living room, her with a cup of tea, him with his ever-present laptop finally closed. They'd been talking about Daniel's progress, about how much happier he seemed, about the parent-teacher conference where his kindergarten teacher remarked on his transformation. The silence that followed was comfortable, familiar, until James said something that made Maya's breath catch. He told her he didn't know what he would have done without her. That she'd saved his son. That she'd saved him too, though he hadn't realized he needed saving. He told her that somewhere along the way, these evenings had become the part of his day he looked forward to most. That her presence in his home had brought back a warmth he thought he'd lost forever when his wife died. He wasn't trying to replace Sarah's memory. He was trying to figure out how to honor it while still allowing himself to feel alive again. Maya felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. She'd spent so long feeling like she wasn't enough, wasn't valuable, wasn't worthy of taking up space in anyone's life. But here was this brilliant, grieving man telling her she mattered. That she'd made a difference. That she was exactly what his family needed. She told him the truth. That she'd been surviving, not living. That covering her sister's shift that morning had felt like just another obligation in a life full of them. But that walking into this house, meeting Daniel, being given the space to matter again, had reminded her of who she used to be before disappointment carved away her confidence. Being here had given her permission to dream again. To believe she could still become the person she'd once imagined. James reached for her hand, his touch tentative, asking permission. When Maya didn't pull away, he told her something he'd been afraid to acknowledge even to himself. That he was falling in love with her. Not just gratitude or convenience or filling a void. Real love. The kind that sneaks up on you when you're not looking, that grows in the quiet moments, that transforms ordinary days into something extraordinary. Maya's heart was thunder in her chest. She'd loved before and been left behind. She'd learned to protect herself by expecting less, by not hoping for too much. But sitting there with James's hand warm around hers, she made a choice. She chose to be brave. She chose to believe that sometimes covering someone else's shift leads you exactly where you're supposed to be. She told him she was falling in love with him too. The months that followed weren't a fairy tale. James still worked demanding hours sometimes. Maya still had moments of doubt and insecurity. They navigated the complexities of blending a romance with Daniel's needs, of honoring Sarah's memory while building something new. There were difficult conversations and hard days and moments when old wounds reopened. But there was also joy. Daniel called Maya his story lady, and then, gradually, just Maya, and then one day, in a quiet voice while they were drawing, he asked if she was going to stay forever. There were family dinners and bedtime routines and lazy Sunday mornings. There was Maya finally finishing her teaching certification, then getting hired at Daniel's school as a reading specialist. There was James learning to leave work behind and be present. There was all of them learning that family isn't just blood and marriage certificates but choosing, every day, to show up for each other. A year after that early morning text message changed everything, James and Maya stood in the garden of the estate with Daniel between them, making promises in front of friends and family. Maya wore a simple dress and held wildflowers, feeling more beautiful than she ever had in her life. Not because of the dress or the setting, but because she'd finally learned her worth. She'd learned that sometimes we're exactly what someone needs precisely because of our struggles, not in spite of them. Your life can change in the time it takes to answer a text message. Sometimes the detours we're forced to take lead us home. Sometimes covering someone else's shift means finally stepping into your own story. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up, be present, and let yourself be seen in all your beautiful, broken, perfectly imperfect humanity. Maya had walked into the Blackwood estate feeling invisible, disposable, like she was just going through the motions of a life that would never be extraordinary. She'd found her purpose not in grand ambitions but in small moments of connection. In sitting with a lonely child. In sharing honest conversation with a grieving man. In remembering that teaching takes many forms and the most important lessons happen in living rooms and kitchens, not just classrooms. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that you matter even when you feel invisible, that your struggles are shaping you for something beautiful, that it's never too late to step into the life you're meant to live, then please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that their breakthrough might be hiding in what seems like just another ordinary day. Because you never know when covering someone else's shift will lead you to the place you've been searching for all along. Your story isn't over. Your transformation is still unfolding. And sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when we simply show up and let ourselves care. Keep going. Keep showing up. Keep believing that you're exactly where you need to be, learning exactly what you need to learn, becoming exactly who you're meant to become. Your moment is coming. Maybe it's already here.